Koine Greek or Alexandrian Greek was the lingua franca of the empire of Alexander the Great, and it remained so after the conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean by the Roman Empire, lasting well into the Byzantine era. Importantly for scholars, Koine Greek was the language of early Christianity. The New Testament was written in Koine, as were the early patristic texts, the early works of Christian theology. Koine means common, and so Koine Greek was not a carefully preserved literary language, but more of a language of international communication and trade, perhaps analogous to international English in our own era. It's similar to both classical Attic Greek and to modern Greek. Indeed, it stands as a midpoint in the development of the language. And if you've got a good grasp of either Attic or modern Greek, then you can probably make a fair go of reading a Koine text. Like international English today, it reads as a simplified version of the language, understandable given its importance as a secondary language, a language of trade and commerce. I learnt Koine when studying theology at university, and still those who study theology are encouraged to learn the language. After all, with the New Testament, as with any other literature, it makes a huge difference if you study the text in the original language rather than just in translation. An important example of this is late in John's Gospel, after the account of Jesus' resurrection. Jesus appears to the disciples at the lakeshore, and after sharing breakfast with them, he has a conversation with Simon Peter. The English translation reads as Jesus repeatedly questioning Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter replies, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." This happens 3 times. If we took that English translation as the sole text, we might read it as Jesus badgering Peter, saying perhaps that he doesn't love him enough. Whereas if we look at the original Greek text, we find instead that Jesus and Peter are using different verbs. Jesus is using agapeo, "Do you love me entirely, wholly?" Whereas Peter uses the word in reply, phileo. Perhaps we might translate that best as, "Yes, Jesus, I'm fond of you." We see then that the text takes on a completely different meaning when we look at it in the original language. This posed difficulties in the era of the early church. Notable example, the early definition of the Trinity in Latin, tres persones, una substantia, 3 persons, 1 essence. In Greek translates to tres hypostases, mia ousia, but St. Jerome, from the Latin side of the empire, found great problems with this in translation. This sparked a huge debate in the early church. It's not easy going from one language to the other. It is important, though, as with any text, that we study it in the original language to glean as much meaning from it in its original context as we possibly can. The prologue to John's Gospel. En arche ein hologos, kai hologos ein pros ton theo, kai theos ein hologos. Hutos ein en arche pros ton theo. Panta di autu egeneto, kai chorus autu egeneto ude he. Hogegonen en auto tson ein. Kai he tson ein to phos ton anthropo. Kai to phos en te scotia finai. Kai he scotia autu u catilabe. Kai ho logos sarx egeneto. Kai eskenosum en hemen. Kai ethea semesta te doxan autu. Doxan hos monogonus parapatros. Pleres caritas. Kai aletheus.